was Dr. Bunch who told me I needed to go to the museum. And he told me about the gentleman who had founded it, but had unfortunately passed away. And
Paul Stewart. I met Paul.
Yes.
Paul Stewart was
that is the name.
Yeah, he was. If I can say this real quickly, he was a barber, and he had pictures in his barbershop of cowboys.
Yeah.
He just collected these over the years, and someone said, you ought to create a museum or something, and that's how he started it. And anytime you met Paul, great guy, he'd always give you the cowboy handshake. It was this little handshake that only, you said cowboys did it all the time. I don't know if you know the handshake or not. Since we're doing audio, I can't really show it to you, but yeah, it's a little handshake that every time he would greet people at his museum or at the barbershop, it's like, yeah, I'll give you the cowboy handshake. Just a great guy.
I would say Dr. Bunch told me I would have that I would have really loved to sit down with him, but that even though he had passed away, he said, man, if you're ever in Denver, you need to go to his museum. And two different times I came through Denver, and both times it was closed and I was unable to go through it. But there's a lady who kind of, I guess she's the executive director of it now. Her and I were both on a special about Black Cowboys on a news station in Paris, France.
Oh wow! Was that Terry? Yeah. Was it Terry Garrett?
I apologize. Terry. I really don't know her name.
I think it's Terry because I know her too. Terry Garrett. She's the director of the museum, which is now they're doing some renovations right now.
Yeah. Well, there were I think they've had a couple different phases of renovations.
Right.
But on that special, she took a camera crew through the house that is now a museum, and it looked wonderful, and I still hope to get through it, and I
you will
been yet.
You definitely will. And I know your book, because they used to have a bookstore in there, and I know they'll put your book in there. They should. I mean, it's something that's really, should be in there. And as I said at the beginning of the show, if I had the money, I would send it to every high school, college in the U.S. Because
now I would appreciate that. Hopefully, you win the lottery.
Oh yeah, I'll remember that. I'll remember you, Keith. But anyway, if you're just tuning in, I'm talking with Keith Ryan Cartwright, author of the new book, Black Cowboys of Rodeo: Unsung Heroes from Harlem to Hollywood and the American West, on the University of Nebraska Press. Now, you talk about in the book about Hollywood, in the title is Hollywood. I want you to talk about, because I knew of one of these folks as far as being a cowboy, and that's being Glenn Turman. But I didn't know about the other three guys with cowboys too. And talk about all four of these guys, because that's something. These are Hollywood actors, but they're also serious. They are cowboys.
Oh yeah, these are not actors who play the part of cowboys. These are Black cowboys who happen to be actors, and we're speaking of Glenn Turman, Reginald T. Dorsey, Oba Babatunde, and James Pickens Jr. Now, James, everyone will know because for the last 14, 15 years, he has played Dr. Weber on Grey's Anatomy.
Right.
Glenn Turman was on Cooley High back in the day. And
he's also on something with Beyonce right now. A clothing.
So she has a clothing line with Adidas, and in the fall, she had a line that came out that was inspired by her having grown up in Houston and her memory of seeing Black cowboys. And the face of that campaign is Glenn Turman and his granddaughter. And so if you see the Beyonce's clothing line that came out in the fall, and you see these an older cowboy and a younger girl, and it's a really highly stylized video. It
is
pretty incredible video. That's Glenn Turman, and then the young girl on horseback is his granddaughter, one of his granddaughters.
Yes, it's really something. And it's like, before we get to the his cowboy experience, something that I didn't know reading the book about Glenn, I didn't know he was up for the role of Han Solo in Star Wars.
How about that?
I didn't know that. I'm like, wow. And tell me just real quickly what happened, why he didn't get it.
Well, obviously, we've now seen all the Star Wars movies, especially the very first Star Wars movie, and the storyline at the time when they were casting and kind of going through developing what the long-term plan for the whole Star Wars storyline was going to be, George Lucas and the studio, they really liked Glenn Turman. They thought he would have made a great Han Solo, and he was their first choice to play that character. But this is the 70s, we're talking about mid to late 70s at this point. And so their one hang up, the one thing that kept them from ultimately casting him was they were afraid if there was a crossing of the characters with Han Solo and Princess Leia, they didn't want there to be any backlash based on a mixed race relationship.
That's amazing.
And ultimately they went with Harrison Ford. In the grand scheme of things, I think you can't fault the casting of of Harrison Ford as Han Solo, because we can't envision anyone else playing that. But it is a disappointment to know that it wasn't based on merit that Harrison Ford beat out Glenn Turman. Right. On merit, it should have been and could have been and would have been Glenn Turman as Han Solo.
That's amazing. That is really something to know that. But as far as getting back to his experience as just being a cowboy, talk a little bit about that as well as the other actors.
Yeah, so Glenn, he grew up in Harlem, and his first real experience with horses was just watching police officers on horseback. And that, between watching Westerns on television and then in person seeing these big, majestic horses and the police officers on horseback, that was his initial interest. That's what really piqued him to ultimately get involved. Reginald T. Dorsey, prior to going to Hollywood and being cast in 21 Jump Street, and I'm not talking about the movies in the 2000s. I'm talking about the series with Johnny Depp and Richard Grieco in the 80s. Reginald grew up in Dallas and in Fort Worth and had horses in his family, and he grew up a cowboy from a young age, and it was going to Hollywood that kind of got him away from it for a while. Oba Babatunde grew up in Jamaica, Queens, and he was introduced to horses on the weekend when his family would go to upstate New York. They would get out of New York City. And so he had horses around him from a young age. And James Pickens Jr., he would watch Westerns. Westerns were his dad's favorite television shows and movies, and they would watch those together. And then later on, when he went to and lived in New York and was getting started as an actor on Broadway around about the same time as Denzel Washington and Samuel L. Jackson.
Right.
James discovered a horse stable adjacent to Central Park. And so as a young man in his basically like mid to late 20s, he was intrigued by those horses that he saw in an old fire station turned into a horse stable. And then he would rent the horse and you walk it down the street and into the park. And then you go horseback riding in the park for the afternoon before going over to the theater at night to be in whatever play he was in at that time. And so that's how those four gentlemen who began a life of being on horseback and getting involved in rodeo events, you know, and they were team Reginald and Glenn teamed up, and they became world champion team penners together. That's amazing.
Yeah, that is.
And something. Ova Babatunde, to this day, you know, he's a horse trainer. And James, every spring, he hosts one of the largest charity team roping events in the country. It's a pro-am event with pros and amateurs. And it is one of the largest charity team roping events. And he raises money for many charities. One of those charities is Camp Giddy Up, which Glenn Turman and his wife run. And what they do every year in the summertime is they bring inner city kids who wouldn't otherwise have been introduced to anything Western related. And they take them out to his ranch, which is right outside of LA. And they spend a week introducing them to all things Western and horseback riding and all of that. And, you know, that it's free to the kids from the inner city that they bring out. So he needs to raise money during the year. And James helps out by putting on, like I say, this team roping charity event. And so they're all friends and they're all working together and they know, you know, Denzel's not a cowboy. He's played a black cowboy in movies and appreciates the culture. You know, Danny Glover wrote a wonderful foreword for my
amazing book. Foreword. I mean, that thing. The book is worth it alone just because of the foreword. I mean, it's amazing what he says.
It is. When I read it, you know, when I got it, you know, there's a lot of times you'll see books and it'll have a celebrity on the cover as having written a foreword, and it's you know, sometimes kind of short, a little this and that, and it's really a way to put the name of a celebrity on the cover. In this case, this foreword, when Danny sent it to me, I'm biased. I mean, part of me is biased. It's my book, and he wrote it for me, right? but when I read it, putting that aside, I cried.
Man.
Now, I'm 52, and it seems like ever since I turned 50, it's a lot easier to make me cry. But Danny made me cry when I read it, and I couldn't believe this is what he wrote. And I read it again, and I cried again, and I put it aside, and I had somebody else read it, and they were blown away. And I went back and I read it a third time, and I was just like, this is, and it sets up the whole book. And you really know from reading it, because there's little Easter eggs that he pulled out from throughout my book, right? So anyone who reads it knows not only did he do a lot of research on his own, not only is he passionate about the topic of keeping alive the history of Black cowboys and the importance of it and its place in American history, but he also read my book, and it's all in there. He understood what I wrote about. He understood where my book picks up and where it ends. And he wrote a real introduction. I'll never repay him for that. How would I?
No.
I can't